Hello and welcome to the Driftwood boat vlog. In this episode we're going to head south downriver from Athlone and we're going to head towards the ancient monastic settlement of Clonmacnoise on the River Shannon. Now the River Shannon is in flood at the moment. This means water levels are higher, it means the current is stronger, and it means trying to navigate a boat going downriver is actually really challenging. Just a quick look at Google Maps just to give you an idea of where we are. This is Athlone town, right in the very centre of Ireland. Those jetties there are where we are moored up. We'll head on south, all the way down here, down to this wee little dog leg here, and this is Clonmacnoise. Now I mentioned that the river was in flood, and indeed it is, and getting the boat out of the mooring is extremely difficult. This is my buddy Des. Des and his wife Anne are down with us for the weekend, so I'm kind of glad the bit of help. The boat nosed into the current here and we're just throttling forward at the same speed as the river is flowing back, and that gives us the effect of travelling sideways, and that's how we'd get the boat out. Quite a difficult manoeuvre, but we got out without bumping anything, and once we were out we could give it a bit of throttle and head on down underneath the bridge here in Athlone. Just on the right hand side there is Athlone Castle. You may remember in a previous episode we had a look around that. There's a number of moored boats here, and in behind the moored boats is Ireland's oldest pub, Sean's Bar. And if ever you find yourself down this way, it's kind of compulsory that you must go and visit Sean's Bar, especially if you're boating type people at all. So we're just pulling into the lock here, and that's the weir on the left hand side, and if you notice the water on one side of the weir is nearly the same height as the water on the other side of it. And we dropped I think about 9 inches altogether in the lock. In fact, over the weekend we saw 3 boats that had got into difficulty. One of them was actually caught on the barrier there at that weir on the Saturday morning, and the RNLI had to come out in a lifeboat and tow them away. This is normally river stretch here, as you could see when we looked at the Google Maps, and now it's just all floodland. That's myself and my buddy Des, all wrapped up. We were joking that if this guy had closed his gate in his field it wouldn't have flooded. But these are the Shannon Callows, and it's a natural floodplain. So every year when the river goes into flood, it spreads out over here, and it's quite an enormous area. And you would imagine that because the water is deeper, because there's much more water there, it makes navigation easier. But in fact, the opposite is the case. It's very difficult to spot the markers because you can see them there. They're only about 2 or 3 feet above the water now. And as a consequence of that, it's quite easy to wander off course and end up in a field, maybe tangled up in a barbed wire fence or something. So we were kind of very cautious coming down here, and also because we had a good current behind us. If we did go aground, it was going to be really difficult to get the boat back off. It wouldn't be half as difficult if we were heading up against the current. Now at this stage here we're almost all the way down. We're actually at that dog leg. Normally those reeds are towering up over your head and you can't see anything, but just to the left of centre of your picture there you might make out one of the round towers that's there in Clonmacnoise itself. Yeah, I really must do something about that anchor, shouldn't I? So this is our first proper glimpse of Clonmacnoise. I say this was sort of founded in around the 5th century. By the 9th to the 11th century there was a population of about 3,000 people living here. It was built on a crossroads effectively, because if you imagine the Shannon is a navigation that runs north to south. Clonmacnoise is built on an esker that crossed Ireland from east to west and was actually a roadway. Now it's quite an exposed mooring here, and you can see the picture doesn't do this justice, but the jetties are actually bouncing up and down quite a bit. And of course that meant that my resident nervous passenger Marion had to hold on for dear life.
Oh Jesus, Mary and Joseph.
We got her off eventually. And there's Des and Anne. Not a bother on them, look. So you can walk up from the boat up to Clonmacnoise, so it's only a short walk, and there's a lovely visitor centre there. There's also a coffee shop, and it's nice to sit down and have a cup of coffee there. You could be mistaken for thinking that this was a graveyard. In fact, it's not really a graveyard. There are people buried here, so maybe that's a bit of a contradiction. But it was actually like a university. The monks all lived here along with their families because they were married. And this is one of the round towers on the site. As you can see, the door is built quite a height off the ground, and this was a place of refuge where the monks would retreat whenever the Vikings would attack, and they would put a ladder up there. They climb in, close the door behind them, pull the ladder in first, obviously enough, and then from the top they could hurl down stones, rocks and foul language at the Vikings. Now, round towers were obviously enough built round, and there's a certain psychology behind this. By building them round, it meant there was no obvious one point of attack, and it put the people off, put off the Vikings when they did try to attack. However, there was a flaw with them. If you could manage to get a fire started within the round tower itself, the round tower would act like a chimney. There was only 4 windows up at the very top of it. They were too small for anybody to escape out of, so it would not have a happy ending for the monks. Now, Clonmacnoise was more a seat of learning and a seat of trade than it really was a monastery. There was a lot of craftsmen here, and as I mentioned, it's on a crossroads between the Shannon, which is a navigation going from north to south, and the Esker, which was a roadway going from east to west. So it was a perfect spot for tradesmen and for craftsmen to ply their trade. As you walk around here, it's such an ancient place. It goes back to the 5th century. You can almost feel the history screaming out at you from the walls. Now, the reason I mentioned earlier on that there's a lot of people buried in Clonmacnoise, it was a belief at the time that if you were buried within Clonmacnoise, it didn't matter what you had done throughout your life, you were still guaranteed to go to heaven. So the local monks used to cash in on this, and burial plots were very, very expensive. And what some people did was they would build a small church or a chapel on the site, and that would guarantee burial rights there for all of their family. So it didn't matter what they did throughout their lives, they and their families would be guaranteed to go to heaven. Well, I hope it worked out for them. Now, while Clonmacnoise is generally associated with the Vikings, it wasn't only the Vikings who sacked this wonderful monastery. The Anglo-Normans came here in the Middle Ages and they plundered the place, and also in 1552 the English garrison that at the time was based up in Athlone, they also sacked Clonmacnoise and in fact reduced most of it to rubble. The castle that we see on the way out was destroyed about the 13th century. I always think it's almost like a great privilege to walk around somewhere like Clonmacnoise because it's a window into the past. And also, when you look at some of the craftsmanship here and you think of the men and probably children who laboured over these sculptures with a hammer and a chisel for days, for weeks, for months, and possibly even for years, until they ended up with a wonderful finished product like this. And it's still there long after they are dead and gone and forgotten. But I think that even though their names are forgotten, in a sense they've been given a certain immortality by creating something like this, because this has outlived them, it's outlived their children, their grandchildren. It'll most definitely outlive you and me as well. And just behind this monument here you can just see a second round tower. That one's a smaller one, but it is still fully intact. Just outside here now, this is another statue by Jackie McKenna. You may recall that we came across another one of his sculptures when we did the episode up in Carrick and Shannon. And this piece is simply called the Pilgrim. Well, now this is all that remains of that castle that I mentioned to you earlier on. It was on a particularly high piece of ground and it had commanding views all along the River Shannon. Well, next week we'll be back on the water and we'll be checking out some pubs in Shannon Bridge. Well guys, that kind of brings us to the end of this week's episode. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, you might click that round subscribe button, tick the notifications bell, and that way YouTube will let you know as soon as the next video is out. Thanks for watching.